So in this episode, Martin will discuss Rand Merchant Bank's approach to financing nature and biodiversity projects across Africa. As financial institutions increasingly recognize the value of protecting natural capital, RNB is developing innovative financial products and strategies that integrate nature-related risks and opportunities into their lending and investment portfolios. The conversation today, therefore, focuses on how RMB is driving sustainable finance with a particular focus on supporting nature-based solutions, biodiversity conservation, and projects that contribute to Africa's natural capital preservation. On the set today, we have Martin Potgieter from Rand Merchant Bank. He is the Director of Natural Capital. Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. It's great to be here.
Yes. So, Martin, let's start. So what is natural capital?
Natural capital refers to, in a strict term, the assets that we have in nature. A good example of that would be a forest and the services that we get as mankind from that forest.
Yeah.
If you want to compare that to property, if you invest in property, your property capital is the building that you buy. And in nature, what we have is the assets that we have that helps us and as mankind. In a strict definition for an investment bank or for an investor, though, it also refers to our ability to invest in nature, which is not something that's immediately obvious, but as we go through our discussion, it should become more obvious for everyone.
So, Martin, what do you do at RMB?
I head up the natural capital team.
Yes.
Increasingly, investment banks are realizing that nature is important, and they're allocating resources in the form of people and assets to it. And that's what our team is doing. We're very serious about nature, and therefore we've got a natural capital team, and I'm the director of that team. The team is multifaceted, so we need people from corporate finance, we need people from a lending arm, we need people from distribution. So there are a number of people working in London and Johannesburg. So it's hard to say how many people we are, but there is at least 10 people working on our projects right now.
So, Martin, does that mean there's opportunity for scientists in investment banks now?
There is a massive opportunity. We are increasingly finding that the people that are active in the environment don't speak the financial language.
Yes.
And at the same time, people working for financial institutions don't necessarily understand what's going in the environment.
Yeah.
So we have to bridge that gap. And one way for us to bridge that gap is by getting people that are financially competent to work for environmental organizations and then for environmentalists to start working for investment banks.
Wow. So there's opportunity for environmentalists to work in investment banking.
Absolutely.
So why
100%.
should the public care about investing in nature?
That's a great place to start. Because of the name of the podcast, Voices of Nature, I would imagine everyone listening in will understand how important nature is, but that would be because of a feeling that they get.
Yeah.
Maybe their childhood, maybe something they did with their parents, maybe something they saw in Africa or South America. But there's some hard, cold facts that we also need to consider when we think about nature, how important it is, and why we should care about it. There's a number of reasons. I'll talk you through some examples, maybe.
Yeah. Please.
I'll give 4 reasons. The first reason I would say is because of the link between nature and climate change. We all know that when there's a fire in the Amazon rainforest or deforestation, it has an impact on climate change. We read about that every day.
Okay.
But it's a lot wider than that. How does animals or biodiversity, which refers to the variety of animals that you have in an environment, how does that impact on climate change? And it's very important for us to understand that because we all know that climate change will affect animals. But the question should be how do animals and biodiversity affect climate change? Because that will help us determine how important it is just from a facts and figure point of view. So a quick example is in the Serengeti, and that's a magical place. Everyone has seen the Serengeti on TV.
Yes.
The hundreds of thousands of wildebeest crossing the river and the crocodiles lying in wait.
Yes.
It's oftentimes narrated by that David Attenborough, that magic voice.
Yes.
And we either cheer on the wildebeest or the crocodiles, depending on
which side
maybe
you were.
depending on what kind of day you had,
Exactly.
or the like.
Yeah.
But about about 7 to 8 decades ago, the number of wildebeest reduced from 1.3 million to 300,000. So 1 million wildebeest was lost. Now, we would not think that has any impact on the savanna or its ability to either absorb carbon or emit carbon. But now the wildebeest has returned, fortunately, to their former number. And now scientists can study what the impact was of the disappearance of the wildebeest on climate change. And remarkably, they found that each wildebeest will per year absorb 4 tons of carbon. And it's a remarkable statistic because remember, there's 1.2 to 1.3 million of them. And how it happens is in the absence of wildebeest, the dry grass in the dry season will burn. And it will not just burn more often, it will burn with more intensity. So it affects the health of the soil.
Yes.
Whereas in the presence of wildebeest, you have them eating the grass. It gets recycled in the form of dung.
Yes.
Then there's millions of dung beetles that bury that carbon under the soil.
Yes.
And therefore you have the Serengeti is a wonderful carbon sink. But if you take the wildebeest away, it becomes an emitter of carbon.
Wow.
Maybe I'll give you another example.
That's interesting.
I've had the privilege of spending hundreds of hours in the African bush looking at elephants.
Yes.
Now, an elephant is a very destructive animal.
Yeah.
Don't know if you've ever spent time with one, but they push over a tree and they will eat there for 5 minutes, only 10% of the tree, and then they move on.
And they use one path. They use the same corridor.
Yeah, 100%. That is so true.
Yeah.
And now, remarkably, recently, studies have shown that forest elephants, in the presence of them, any forest in Africa, so the African forest elephant, where they're present, they will absorb 7% more carbon, the forest area. The reason, you probably wonder why that is, and there's 2 reasons. Number one, the really large trees have really big seeds.
Yes.
So they need to be carried around, and the only animal that can carry them around and disperse them is a forest elephant. It needs to go through the bowels of an elephant for that seed to be dispersed.
Yes.
And secondly, elephants, as they move, they tend to trample all of the softwoods, the smaller trees, which allows the hardwoods to grow larger.
Yes.
And through just those 2 together, there's a 7% additional carbon absorption.
Wow.
And to put that in context, that is equivalent to about 670 million cars. If you look at the area of the Congo Basin, the forests
600 and what?
670 million cars per year. That's right. The unfortunate thing is that forest elephants have reduced in number from 1.2 million to about 100,000.
Wow.
And if we can recover them, you can imagine how much extra carbon can be absorbed.
Yeah.
But that's also the reason for the podcast today, is to talk about the urgency. How important is it for us to intervene now? Because the losses that we have seen in nature can be reversed.
Yeah.
But you can't wait too long until you intervene. So that's on climate change. 3 other quick reasons. It's an impact on our health. More than half of all FDA-approved medicines here in the US is plant-based.
Yes.
Think about morphine, codeine, caffeine. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then thirdly is the economy, how it impacts our pockets and our ability as mankind to thrive. There's estimates that half of our GDP, which is $44 trillion, is either moderately or highly dependent on nature. The WEF, which is the World Economic Forum, not the World Environment Forum, estimates that in the next 10 years for corporates, 5 of the top 10 risks are nature related.
Yes.
And then lastly, just for our well-being, for food.
Yeah.
75% of our crops are reliant on pollinators. We rely on forests to capture rain. We rely on the wetlands to clean the water that we drink. And oftentimes when you think of people saying, I need some time off, they don't go and walk around on a street in New York. They try and get to a park, and if they're possible, they get into nature. So those are 4 really good reasons for us to worry about nature, why it should concern us, why it should excite us, and why it's really important for us.
You know, Martin, many times when we talk about carbon absorption, we only think of the plants. We don't think of the role that wild animals play. And so you speaking about the elephants and the wildebeest it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. You know that for now 50% of the carbon that we emit is captured by either marine or terrestrial ecosystems.
Yes.
The problem is that ability is increasingly falling away.
Yeah.
And that creates a problem for us. But the thing is, you can only have that absorption in those ecosystems if they are functioning. And for them to function, you need biodiversity. In the African landscape, you need the apex predator.
Yes.
You need the lion, you need the wild dog, you need the leopard, because in the absence of them, there's an imbalance,
Yes.
and the ability to absorb carbon falls away.
Yes. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
So the need to intervene is pretty urgent.
Yes, it is urgent, and what
Yeah.
I should say is that we should not be alarmist.
Okay.
That this podcast should not be alarmist.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
I hear you. I agree.
yes,
Yeah.
and this is going to be an optimistic and a hopeful
Yes.
discussion.
Yes.
But unfortunately, when we talk about urgency, we need to look at some of the facts and the figures just to
Okay.
understand what is going on. Recently, a report revealed that in the last 50 years, we lost 2/3 of all wild animals.
Wow.
Just think at 2 out of every 3. We've lost 75% of all lions,
Yeah.
84% of all freshwater aquatic species.
Wow.
The estimates are that the rate of extinction today is 1,000 times more than it should be. We've lost almost 40% of our wetlands, also in the last 50 years,
Wow.
50% of our coral reefs. And interesting today, 70% of all birds are chickens.
Yeah.
So the need to intervene is really urgent. We can't wait any longer. But it is a hopeful podcast. It's an intention is to show to people that we can make a difference. And obviously for banks and investors, now is the time to intervene. And part of my role at RMB is to show to investment bankers and investors how they can invest in nature.
And so is there enough investment? Is there enough funding?
Dorothy, there's nowhere near enough, but there's two answers to the question. The first one is that estimates are that we need about $500 billion per year to keep us on the 1.5 degree pathway.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of that is intended for agriculture and areas of nature that have already been disturbed.
Yeah.
And about 10% of that should go into conservation, which is about $45 billion.
Yeah.
And of that, Africa should rightly get 20%, which is $9 billion. Now, I'm here to represent Africa, but this refers to this should be covered by all the different regions.
Yeah.
I don't think we have even $1 billion going into conservation areas in Africa. So the first thing we must do is we must increase the amount of capital available.
Yeah.
But the second part, and this is very important, is there are very large pots of money available for intervention.
Okay.
There's large amounts of money being set aside by governments. Governments are doing great jobs also in getting biodiversity schemes, offset schemes, and the like into place. We've got the Jeff spending more than $1 billion per year.
Yeah.
We've got philanthropists very active in Africa looking after really large landscapes. We've got investors. About a year ago, 15 different asset managers committed all of their assets towards better custody of nature. It was $15 trillion that they are managing. So there is a lot of money available, but it's quite hard for those entities to get money to the right place. Which begs the question then, is there enough opportunity? Are there organizations, entities, landscapes that can absorb that amount of money? And the answer is absolutely yes. Some of even just in the regions of Africa that we work, which is mostly south of the equator, the need for money is huge. I can think now of, we're working with 3 different implementers, and their annual need is in the region of $350 to $400 million. So they've got the projects, they've got the large landscapes, they've got the mandates, but they need the money to be able to implement. And the question then is, how do we connect those two? And is there an intermediary that currently is playing that role, and how can we increase the number of intermediaries playing that role?
Yeah.
And that's, of course, where an investment bank comes in, because that is what we do. We connect the supply of capital with the need for that capital.
And indeed, when you speak to a number of asset owners, they would say they don't know where these projects are.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
What was interesting is we're working on a number of species bonds, like call it a lion bond, and everyone is familiar with the World Bank's rhino bond, which channeled money towards rhino conservation in South Africa.
Yeah.
But investors the problem for investors is that these products only come around every 3 years.
Oh, yes.
And remember, an investor, even if he cares a lot about the environment, he also needs to care about the money that he's managing.
Exactly.
And because he's a fiduciary, he's looking after the people that gave him the money.
Exactly.
And the problem, therefore, is if you have a product that comes along only every 3 years, it really is not a business opportunity for him. Because every time something comes along, he needs to do due diligence. He needs to understand what it is, where it is. And we're talking to a number of people in London that works for large asset managers there, and they love the idea, they love the opportunity, but they're saying to us as RMB that it only becomes an opportunity if we have a strong pipeline of these opportunities.
Yes,
because
that's true.
let's say we do a lion bond.
Yes.
The world loves lions. We all know about Lion King, all of the movies.
Yes.
It's very sad to think that we've lost 3/4 of our lions. It's a highly threatened species now, and there's targeted poaching.
Yeah.
But so I can take a lion bond to him, and it's a charismatic animal, and they get excited.
Yeah.
But that investment manager is rightfully asking what comes next.
Yeah.
Because if I have to spend 6 months understanding the landscape in Africa and lions, that's a lot of time, and I can spend that time, provided that following on that there's a large landscape bond or a rhino bond or an elephant bond or a marine landscape bond. So we need to, as investment managers, allow that opportunity to come along, and as investment bankers, we must create that product. We must create that project lineup,
so that the projects are more lined up, and then it creates a business case.
That is absolutely that. We spend a lot of time at RMB working out what that pipeline looks like, when we should start going on the different projects. But the reality also is that this is a new asset class.
Yes,
which means that I would say 4 out of 5 investors that we talk to, we first have to explain how we do it. And hopefully 3 to 4 years from now, it is no longer a question that we have to answer, because it will be known out in the public. There's some other investment banks also working on this kind of product. And then increasingly, as we get the pipeline going, it will become an asset class. That's what I referred to up front, the natural capital being an asset class.
Yes.
That is where we, as the average man on the street, can start investing in nature. And we can pick. We can say, I want to invest in lions, or want to invest in rhinos. And you know that there's a fiduciary looking after your money. And then secondly, also you can see how your own portfolio and your investment returns improve as nature improves.
And so, Martin, there's the how you do it, and there's the why you do it. I think that impact piece, that nature and the biodiversity piece is really lacking in terms of, clarity on the why. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the why comes down to some of the reasons that I discussed. But, but what I will also say is that there are ways to invest in nature, but it's a very narrow opportunity set. And typically, I would say today, the biggest investors in nature, ironically, would be the heavy emitters, because they need the carbon credits. And carbon credits have been in the news a lot lately. What I will say is, speaking from on-the-ground experience in Africa, is that there are amazing projects looking to reduce deforestation, especially in a country like Zambia. So there might be a bit of negative press, but I will just say from the ground up, there's a really amazing impact. But the problem is, as you say, how do we widen that opportunity set? Because if you cannot quantify the amount of forest that you are preventing from being deforested, but you want to protect a very large landscape, or you want to protect a particular species, how do you get money into that? Because you don't have a carbon credit methodology that can look after that. And the World Bank's Rhino Bond was a wonderful example of that. And it was done in March 2022. And I think it really set the benchmark for what a bank can do when it comes to intervening in nature. In broad terms, the World Bank borrowed an amount of money, $150 million, and they paid the investors a yield that was a bit lower than they are used to. And that yield saving was not taken by the World Bank. That was channeled towards rhino bond or rhino preservation in my country, in South Africa. But the investors that came in, and that's the thing that gets us most excited, they were not concessional funders. They were commercial, mainstream asset managers, Nuveen, Alliance Bernstein, some of the world's largest managers. Now, because they are commercial, they're not happy to accept that reduction in yield.
Yes, of course.
So what the World Bank's bond does is at the end of the term, at the end of 5 years, it considers the health and the growth of the rhino population in 2 parks in South Africa. And then depending on the success of the intervention, the investment returns get increased. Up to the point where those investors who took a yield cut actually outperform what should have been a benchmark asset for them when they initially went in. And what's interesting about the World Bank is in discussions with them, I've said to them, what are you doing next? And they are busy working on a new exciting bond. But what we need to get right is we need the investment banks in different parts of the world to start replicating what the World Bank did. They did a great job, but we can't just rely on them. We need an RMB in Africa to do it. We need a bank in Central America, a bank in Latin America, a bank in Southeast Asia to do the same. So we're busy replicating that. There were some great features to it, and that's where we believe we're going to get money into threatened species, but also into really large landscapes where they are too undeveloped to attract tourism revenue. The government does not have the money. The philanthropists they focused on other areas. So how can we get that capital to those areas? And that's what we're busy working on.
And is that what you just described? Is that what you call outcomes-based payments? That
is exactly what we mean by that. Yes, and I think it's important to say that there's a lot of sustainability-linked loans and the like, and oftentimes what happened there is the investors say that if the company that issues the bond, if they do very well in their KPIs, then the yield will step down a bit, and the funders are happy to accept that because they know they when their investment returns go down, they do good. These bonds work differently because if the underlying project does well, then the investment returns go up. And we believe that for nature, that is what we want. Because if we can say as investors that I've now invested in 10 different bonds and rhinos, lions, elephants, securing a large landscape, reintroducing, rehabilitating, rewilding a large landscape increases my investment returns, that will start changing the behavior of those investors. For example, most of us belong to a retirement fund or a pension fund, and once a year we get a report to say that on our pension, let's say you've got $100 in there, you had a 10% return, and it's 1% higher than most other managers would have earned. And then if you have a little reason attaching to it to say something like, because we restored a wetland system, or the health of the lion population increased. Next time you throw a packet of chips away or that cigarette stub, before you throw that away, you're going to think this might affect my investment returns. So that's why it's so important for us to create this alignment. When nature does well, you need the investment returns to go up. Someone needs to pay for that. That's normally what we call an outcomes-based funder. That's a different entity, but for the investor, you perfectly align with the outcomes in nature.
And so nature does well, the investor is happy, the outcomes-based funder, out of their concern or focus on impact, they've also played their role.
That's correct. Maybe to explain that is in the case of the rhino bond. The question is, at the end of 5 years, when rhinos do well, where does that extra money come from? Someone needs to pay for it, because remember now the investor is doing well, the money going to the rhinos has been spent, so there needs to be someone else that pays in only upon success. And we call that the outcomes-based funder.
Yes.
Now, the role, that role was played by the GEF for the World Bank. And we believe that our role as investment bankers is to find outcomes-based funders that want to make that payment. So that is someone that wants to put money into nature, but you do it only if the project is successful. So that transparency, that measurability crowds in or attracts pools of capital that otherwise would never invest in nature.
Yeah.
A good example, I know that you also had a discussion today with someone that is involved with TNFD, which is Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosures.
Yes.
And it's a very exciting development for us because corporates will have to disclose their reliance on nature and also their impact on nature.
Yeah.
Now imagine you are a heavy water user.
Yes.
Typically, you extracting that from a river, a wetland, or from the ground. And most heavy water users that I see, they really care about it and they want to do something about it, but the ability or the tool to do it is just not there.
Yeah.
Now, what we can do in a biodiversity bond is we can go work in the upstream freshwater catchment system.
Okay.
For example, remove alien vegetation. And we find that in some parts of Africa that for each hectare that you clear, which is 2.5 acres in American terminology, there's an extra 1 million liters of water going into the river.
Okay.
And what we can do, because we're looking at large pools of capital, is we can look at 100 to 200,000 hectares at a time. And the amount of water you can put back into the river system means it can compensate for what the company is using downstream. So I can get that heavy water user to issue a water bond using this exact same tool. And under TNFD now in their corporate disclosures, it looks like an investment in nature.
Yes.
If they intervene in nature, which they all try to do, it's typically done in a small manner and it's seen to be a donation and it makes its way into a footnote. But when they become involved in a bond of this nature, it looks like an investment. Which it is. Because they are investing in the sustainability, the real sustainability of that freshwater catchment system, because there's a large scale attached to it.
Yes.
Also, the second thing that I should add is that because of investment banks being really careful with their reputation, they need to look at who they work with.
Yes.
So that means that reputation is everything, track record, experience. Has that implementer been doing it for many years? What is the risk of the project not working? And once we've taken that through due diligence, we know that the project is going to work. And therefore, increasingly, companies can get involved and thereby fund biodiversity, healthy ecosystems, and animals.
Martin, for investment banks that are thinking of, structuring this kind of tools, financial tools and instruments, the outcomes-based funders, are they more philanthropies? I know you talked about the GEF, but what nature are those kind of organizations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently funding for nature comes from 3 main pools.
Yes.
It's governments, philanthropists, and tourists.
Yes.
That's really where the money comes from to look after nature. But then you also have public entities like the GF spending really large amounts on nature, more than $1 billion on average, and that clearly makes a big difference. But I would be really concerned if we create new financial tools and we're really just channeling that money into different pots.
Okay.
We have to create new pools of capital. And our belief is that you need to look at 2 things to do it, is where are the largest pools of capital? And then secondly, can you attract those pools of capital? Now, if you look at the world of bonds, on average, $2 trillion of new bonds get issued every single year. Just think about that that number.
Wow.
And the Rhino bond was $150 million. So in percentage terms, it's 0.00 something. It's just such a big number. But most of that money is used to fund corporates, to purchase properties, acquisitions and the like. So the question then becomes, how can we direct more of that money towards nature? Because that money currently is not coming towards nature. So the first answer would be to attract that pool of bond capital. We need a portion of that $2 trillion. But then we as RMB, we've identified 6 other pools of capital that are looking to fund nature, but they don't have the method to do it right now. Some quick examples is for example, the heavy water user.
Yes.
They don't know how to get money in. They don't know where to start. They don't know who the good implementers are. They don't know where to find the good projects. So you need an intermediary to find that project. And that is what we're doing now.
Yeah.
But another interesting example is family offices in the US. When we discuss nature in Africa with them, the response we oftentimes get is the risk of bad execution, fraud, embezzlement, political risk of civil war that's present in most countries of the world. But the problem is Africa is in a different time zone. And if you put your money as a family office in the US into Africa, you want to be able to control what the outcomes are, but it's a different time zone. You have to fly out. So it can't work. But remember, when you become an outcomes-based funder in these bonds, is if the project fails, you don't pay for it. So we take all of that risk away.
Exactly.
So suddenly that new channel to fund money or to fund nature in Africa, it opens up. And another good example is we're working with high net worth investors in Europe, a particular family office that's looking after 3 different families. It's private equity. Every time they sell something, the money becomes available and the families want to intervene. They want to do something.
Yes.
But they're saying that the money cannot just be given to any implementer or to any NGO because it's not clear where the money is going. Now, and they're saying, show me something where I can give my money away and you measure the impact for me. And that is exactly what you're doing. Let's say you're doing a lion bond.
Yes.
And you start in a really large landscape where currently there's a problem with the lions. There's either not enough prey species, or there's not enough water points, or there's too much poaching. If we intervene, you can, let's say you're working in a landscape, and this is an actual project we're busy working on. It's close to a million hectares, or it's actually slightly in excess of 1 million hectares, and we're putting a part of that aside. And in that area, there's at the moment probably only 20 lions, and it should be 200 to 300 lions. Now, if we take that high net worth investor and we say to them, you're putting your money into this, and at the end of 5 years, if we are successful in getting the lions from 20 to 200, your money was used for that. If we fail in achieving that target, you get your money back. So we've identified 6 of those.
So you take on that risk.
Yes, and who takes on that risk? It's the investor.
Yes.
Because the investor is underperforming on day one by not much. His capital is protected. He's underperforming by, let's say, 1.5% a year. But he's going to do due diligence on the project. He believes he's going to get his benchmark return.
Yes.
But if the project fails, then he ends up being the payer of that project.
Exactly.
And that is how it should work. There is an element of risk transfer.
Yes.
And what's quite interesting in many conversations that we've had with bond investors, we keep saying to them, you do understand that even though the base case here is that you're going to perform in line with your benchmark, there's the risk that you are going to underperform. And the bond managers increasingly say to us, but in every single investment I make, there is the opportunity for me to underperform and outperform.
Yes.
This is no different. If I can do my testing and my analysis and my due diligence on the project, and I confirm that I'm comfortable with the risks, then I also believe that I'm going to outperform.
Yes.
And the bond manager will do the same thing for any other asset that he invests in, and the same goes for any other stock investor.
And you've talked about very many different parties. And so let's talk about the partnerships side.
Partnership.
Yes.
It's such a meaningful word.
Yes.
Partnership means it means you build a relationship.
Yes.
It's not a once-off.
Yes.
You're not doing something to enrich yourself or something that looks like a marketing exercise. And we're finding that for us to be successful in building our pipeline of bonds, we need to partner. Who do we need to partner with?
Yeah.
With a whole host of entities. I've mentioned the different categories
Yes.
of people that we involved with. Firstly, let's look at the investors. You need investors that want to invest in a new asset class.
Yeah.
You need investors that understand what you are trying to build. And we've got some incredible investors, some of the world's largest DFIs, and also some of the most forward-thinking investors that are partnering with us. And we say to them that we're going to work on these projects with them for up to a year, sometimes even a bit longer than that. And the intention is to bring them in as early as possible so they feel like they are co-creating it with us. Obviously, we need to partner with the outcomes-based funders, and there's some large entities all over the world that are looking to do that. But another very important partnership that we have to build is with the underlying implementers.
Yes.
Those are the entities on the ground working with the local communities, employing thousands of people, and we need to understand how they go about their daily jobs. Do they look after their staff? Do they look after the communities? Do they look after healthcare? Do they look after the social environment? All of those things are really important to find a good project, and that's not something that you can discover within 1 or 2 months worth of work. It's long-term partnerships, spending time on the ground. We've got a very exciting site visit coming up where we've got investors from Washington, New York, and London flying out to Africa to a landscape where it's of such a big size that you probably have 1 or 2 humans passing through per year.
Wow.
Flying in, spending time in a tent, understanding the size of the landscape, what the opportunity is, and that connection, that partnership is something that should last for 10 to 20 years as we build out this asset class.
So partnerships and especially getting the investors to understand what is happening on the ground, including the impact to the communities.
100%
is very, very
yes, 100%. And I will also say that I'm finding that organizations like Anchor, African Natural Capital Alliance, DFIs, there's a network of people looking to make a difference. And every time I pick the phone up to one of those, they say to me, have you spoken to this person? Have you spoken to that person? Then you start talking to that person and they say, have you spoken to this person? Have you spoken to that person? And that's how the network builds. But you cannot do that if you say to all of them, we are RMB, we're going to do a lion bond. Are you excited? But when the message is we're building a pipeline of these, we're working with African parks, peace parks, the Nature Conservancy, and we're building it with each one of them. We're building a pipeline of 10 to 15 projects. Then it gets exciting. Then people want to partner, because the other thing of partnership is you need parties that want to partner. It's a very unhealthy partnership if you have one partner pursuing it and the other one is not pursuing it. But we're finding that those partnerships are very healthy and very productive for everyone, and hopefully one day for nature as well.
Yes. And let's talk about the challenges. What challenges are you seeing?
There's a host of challenges. Yes. It is brand new. Every time we speak to an investor, we have to explain again how it works, what it is we are planning to do. And our hope is that it is not just us creating these products, but that there's other investment banks and other banks in the world doing the same. And the good news is that there is a lot, but it's going to take a lot of work to develop this asset class. The other challenge is for these implementers. Many of them work at a very large scale already. One of the ones that I mentioned have an annual budget of $130 to $140 million. Wow. That's a big amount of money, but that needs to double. The project pipeline is there for them, but that means that you have to double your operations, double the number of staff. So obviously to scale up is going to require big investment, and then you have to have the belief that this is sustainable. If there's only 2 or 3 bonds, we're going to get a lot of extra money into nature, but it's going to last for 5 years and then the money is gone. So we have to build this asset class where we've got many banks providing products, portfolios, pipelines out into the market so that it becomes investable. And then another challenge that we have found is that we as investment banks need to talk their language. We need to develop those skills, because if an NGO comes to us and say that they're involved in this big project in Africa, how do we know if it's a good quality one? How do we know if it's a good landscape, if it is recoverable, if they should intervene there? What's the community relationships? So there's a big challenge for us as banks to make sure that we pick the good projects, and the ones that are not qualifying yet, how do you get them to the point where they are investable? And so the last challenge I will talk about really is for the implementers. Those are the people that are on the ground implementing these big projects. For them, this is also new. We are trying to create funding for them that's long term, because oftentimes these implementers raise money on an annual basis or on a biannual basis, and that just cannot work, because how do you plan for 10 years in the landscape if you only have funding for the next year?
Exactly.
That cannot work. But it's a big challenge for the implementers, because even though all of them will work with the highest quality DFI, so the hurdle is very high to get funding in already. When you get investors in, there's a new hurdle that you have to clear, because investors, unfortunately, are mostly looking at facts and figures, investment returns.
Exactly.
Nature is important, obviously,
yes.
but because you're a fiduciary, you have to make sure that your money is going to be safe. So the number of questions going to the implementers, the kind of questions that they get asked, are you sure this is going to happen over the next 5 years? Quantify this for me. Why do you think it is going to work? Is your insurance in place? Do you have the right systems, HR systems, employment equity, all of those things that investors are worried about that possibly your existing funders were not that concerned about. So it's a big challenge for implementers. It's a lot of extra work if you want to get a bond done. But the carrot obviously is that you're going to get funding for the long term. We're attracting new pools of capital. And our view is that you can maybe increase the pools of capital, philanthropy, government and tourists by 10% a year. It could be possible. But we need to increase that by 10 to 20 times.
10 to 20
not
times.
10 to 20%. And that comes from new pools of capital. And that comes from these bonds, debt for nature swaps, carbon credits, biodiversity credits, all of these very interesting financial tools. We need all of them to work to get all of that money into nature.
Wow, Martin, it's amazing what you're doing at RMB. And just final words, what's your dream? If you had a magic wand and you had the opportunity to change something and to see a certain outcome, what would it be?
My dream would be that as I walk around here on the streets in Manhattan, and I look at the press and how they applaud and cheer on people paying $30-40 million for a penthouse.
Wow.
That we will have nature at the point where when wealthy individuals start spending that amount of money on a wetland or a coral reef, the press does exactly the same.
Wow.
And then secondly, that the average man on the street, so that's you and me, have the opportunity to invest in a wetland and a coral reef. And that's not a donation. That's not just money I'm giving away. I'm investing in it because I know it is an asset and I can actually make a return on it. That is my dream.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't add more to that. Martin, thank you very much for the time and thank you for sharing your insights. You know, it's amazing how passionate you are, and whenever you speak, I get to learn quite a lot. And I believe our listeners and our viewers will learn quite a lot from this session. Thank you for spending your time out of a busy Manhattan week, and glad to have you on the set, hoping that we can speak more over time.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. And also thank you so much for this opportunity, but also for you being a partner to RMB and for connecting us to so many other people.
Thank you, Martin. You're welcome. Let me say you're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Voices of Nature, a podcast by Anchor. And today you had Martin from RMB. Thank you very much.